Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Today is Wednesday, June 5th, and we are one day away from the NBA Finals officially tipping off. So I've put it off long enough. I'm going to be giving my official predictions for the NBA Finals. We're also going to be doing a little bit of a subjective activity, but one that is a little fun, ranking the top 10 players in the NBA Finals from both the Celtics and the Mavericks. We also have some various NBA rumors from the Los Angeles Lakers reportedly zeroing in on JJ Redick as their next head coach. There is another name that is also in the conversation as well, so we're going to be sharing our thoughts on that entire situation. We have the San Antonio Spurs, who are making everybody other than Victor Wembanyama and Devin Vassell available this offseason, as there is already, at least from the national media, more so during the regular season, but this idea that the Spurs are going to start feeling increasingly more pressure over the coming years to put better talent around Victor Wembanyama, so sort of talking through their overall situation. And then we got the news yesterday that the 49ers have signed running back Christian McCaffrey to a new deal, so we'll just be sharing some thoughts on the details surrounding that deal, how it could impact the other offseason moves that they make, with some rumors swirling about both Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, so we will be diving into all of that. But before we get into the show, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section and give us all of your thoughts and the latest happenings in sports. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation and becoming a bigger part of the show, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. And if you leave a comment with your tip, it will pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything on that front would be greatly appreciated. I have been pretty straightforward, I think, for the most part, in terms of where my overall feelings on this NBA Finals series lie, but I wanted to just sort of wait it out and as much as I could and sort of come to a more, reasonable conclusion as to where I think that this NBA Finals series lies. Of course, the Boston Celtics versus the Dallas Mavericks. The series officially tips off on Thursday night, so tomorrow night at the time of recording here. And we did just get news that Kristaps Porzingis is officially good to go for Game 1 against Dallas. This was sort of expected for a while, but it's been talked about on many different outlets. Porzingis does have a massive role in this series as to both sides of the ball, of forcing Dallas's very interior-heavy defense to guard out along the perimeter, specifically looking at Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, who throughout the postseason run so far have both been incredible for Dallas, but they were at least able to sort of hide at various times on worse three-point shooting options, where when you go back to they both did a really good job in the Clippers series, although we did see Maxi Kleber, who also was dealing with the dislocated shoulder injury. He carried a lot of the load as well in that Clippers series. This could be a spot for him in the finals, because then once Kleber went down, we saw the Mavericks were able to benefit from having a Josh Giddey getting minutes in the starting lineup, where he is who the big man would take between Gafford and Lively, and they could sort of roam around in the paint a little bit more. Even when they went to that more traditional, spacing lineup, the Thunder that is, the backup center Jalen Williams, it was clear that the Mavericks were willing to live with him making shots, and he was unable to do so. And it's not like Chet was this, flamethrower from three that I know he can be in future years to come, but that didn't necessarily play out in that series. And then you look at the series against the Timberwolves, and Rudy Gobert, of course, was never going to be a threat from outside. Karl Anthony Towns did end up getting some decent looks from three, but really outside of his Game 4 performance, his three-point shot was never there for him. So this is a series that I do think that the Celtics can be a little bit more traditional 5-out and force the Mavericks into guarding them along the perimeter, and that is going to be a massive part of this series. Now, at various times, we did see opposing teams of the Boston Celtics sort of give up that three-point shot to Al Horford. Specifically, if you look at the final few games of the Cleveland series and then even a little bit early on against Indiana. And Al Horford is somebody that, to some degree, you can live with him taking shots, but then there's also a chance he shoots 50% like he did in the closeout game against Cleveland and in Game 3 against Indiana. So it's not necessarily this chalk it in, you don't have to worry about it from a perimeter perspective, which could definitely be a key alteration in this series. But a lot of people, if you are going to pick the Mavericks, the thought process is that Luka Doncic is the best player in the series and you are going to ride it out with him. They also have some lengthy defenders as well to possibly throw at Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown with the combination of PJ Washington and Derrick Jones Jr., who have been incredible through this postseason run. And if you're the Celtics, there isn't really that exposable mismatch as well, where we did see, as much as Tyrese Halliburton is a massive piece of that Pacers team, the Celtics' easiest offense during that Eastern Conference Finals series, at least through the first two games, was to go at Tyrese Halliburton and Andrew Nembhard to some degree as well, and some of those smaller guards. But I don't believe that Dallas is necessarily that sort of exploitable on the defensive end. So there, we've seen in the past, specifically if you look at the last finals run for the Celtics in 2022, the Warriors had length in Andrew Wiggins, and he was able to shut down Tatum. Now, we went through this yesterday on the show, the fact that we saw Tatum have to carry this massive offensive load through the postseason, that round by round his points per game dipped. Meanwhile, this year we are seeing him only get better as the postseason comes along here, averaged 30 points per game in that Eastern Conference Finals series, and should be much more rested in terms of, having his legs under him. Also just understanding now what it's like to go through that full 4-round postseason run. I think that the Celtics were just sort of outclassed from a maturity and stamina standpoint when they faced a Warriors team that had been to the finals just a few years before. Obviously, not the exact same core as the 2019 playoff run, but you get the point. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, they knew what it took. The Celtics didn't at that point. So, when you look at the difference in experience as well in this series, it is a lot of unprovens, you could say. There's one NBA champion on each team, Kyrie Irving for the Dallas Mavericks, of course, and Drew Holiday for the Boston Celtics. Both of those players winning their rings with different teams, but coming in as sort of lead guard types. Kyrie, obviously, a little bit more of a lead guard in the traditional standpoint, but both of them held massive roles in their postseason runs when they won, within the past decade. Kyrie in 2016, Drew Holiday a little bit more recent in 2021. But again, other than those players, there hasn't been a ton of, finals experience. The Celtics do hold the overall edge, though, in terms of the fact that they just made the finals a couple years ago. So overall here, when you are comparing these two rosters, this would be pretty devastating from a Celtics perspective if they were to fall short in this series, considering the fact that this was supposed to be their season, all the way all the way through, at least the Eastern Conference was sort of a little bit of a shoo-in that there shouldn't be another team in the East that can really contend with the Celtics. The Mavericks put together this dark horse run, and it is awesome to see, but at the same time, they sort of defied expectations. This season is already a massive success for them. Meanwhile, for the Celtics, this is to some degree where the Celtics have kind of, this is where their season starts to some degree, where, you include their regular season and their postseason record. They are now 76-20, I believe the Celtics are. So to put together, this dominant run through the entire, call it, 8 months now that the Celtics have been playing basketball, going back to October, and to fall short here would be, again, I think a little detrimental. Now, in terms of how they would look at the future of their organization, I feel like they have their top 7 guys under contract for the next couple of years as long as Al Horford doesn't retire. There is a little bit of speculation there that if they were to win, he would want to go out on top. But, for the most part, this team is going to be staying together, I believe. But, there is absolutely a ton of pressure with them. And I do think that they're the better team. The Mavericks, again, have been incredible. I didn't necessarily see them putting together this entire run. I forget if I actually picked them. I know I picked them over the Clippers. I forget what my exact prediction was going into OKC. But, it's been a lot of fun to watch. And the Mavericks absolutely have stuff to build off of in years to come. The Celtics should be the better team right now, though, in terms of top 7 for top 7. Now, the Mavericks are a deeper team than I think a lot of people believe. We saw some struggles with the Celtics bench unit in the Eastern Conference Finals. Get to that point, getting Porzingis back is that much more important, because not that Al Horford is your traditional creator, but you get to sort of stagger his minutes. You get to have Porzingis playing off of the bench a little bit more. And I will say, sort of when you look at, again, knock on wood that he is able to be fully healthy, there is a slight concern with Porzingis' injury history. If you look at sort of what happened in Game 7 for the Knicks when they faced the Pacers in the Eastern Conference semifinals, that idea of coming into a big matchup. Now, this is Game 1 as opposed to Game 7, so the Celtics would have time to react. But, the Knicks think that OG Anunoby is going to be good to go. And within the first 5 minutes, it's clear that he is unable to. And I do feel like the Celtics have been preparing probably since, to some degree, the Eastern Conference Finals, that Porzingis was going to be back for this finals appearance. What if he isn't good to go? Could be a massive wrench in the situation here for the Celtics. But ultimately, as much as Luka Doncic is the best player in this series, I don't think that Jason Tatum is, miles behind him. Now, Luka is, I would say, top 3 without a doubt. Tatum is in that top 10. Now, you can definitely argue whether he's closer to 5 or 10, but I don't believe that it is this massive fall off from Luka to Tatum, and that's something that we'll get into a little bit more in the next segment. But I think that ultimately, it's those 4 of Kyrie and Luka versus Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum that are overall pretty evenly matched. And then what is the remainder of the group going to be able to produce? I think that I lean with the Celtics in that situation. Now, Luka does have sort of this level that he can go to that I don't think a Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown can go to. Luka, this level in terms of a scoring perspective. But all of that to be said, this should be a really good series. If it's going to be a blowout one way or another, it's going to be Luka not having the legs under him. He was dealing with all of these injuries in the first 2 rounds, and he looked, flawless in the Western Conference Finals. Hopefully that holds up as well, but I am going to lean with the Celtics for this series, and I guess my official pick would be Celtics in, let's call it 6. Mavericks absolutely do have a play at this, but I just believe that the Celtics are the better team. I think that they are really capable of throwing a lot of different defensive looks. The Mavericks on defensive on defense themselves have a lot of great individual defenders, and I've been really impressed with their paint protection and some of the, rotations off of that as well. But I don't think that from a personnel standpoint they necessarily have these different options. Now Jason Kidd and Joe Mazzulla really both have a little bit of proving themselves to do. Now they obviously both have their jobs headed into next season, but both coaches that have been questioned over their most recent tenures. Jason Kidd, going back a little bit more, as well as he has had some, less than ideal stints. But there is a lot of prove-its on both sides of this series, and I'm going to lean with the Celtics on this one. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section. We are going to take a break here, and when we come back on the other side, I want to stick to the conversation surrounding this series and go through and rank the top 10 players in the NBA Finals. So again, let me know your thoughts in the comments section, but we will be right back after this quick break. Stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose, if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are continuing on the conversation about the NBA Finals, which tip off tomorrow night. And before we actually get these games, I do want to do a little bit of a preview here and talk about the top 10 players in the NBA Finals in my eyes. Now, keep in mind, ranking players can be extremely subjective, so this is ultimately, I think I'm considering a little bit of my expectations for this series in particular, but there is some aspect of pedigree as well with these players, so definitely give us your thoughts in the comments section. But without further ado here, number 10, I have Al Horford, and this is, again, a little bit of an example of pedigree where Al Horford, we've seen him come through in big moments for the Celtics for a number of these years that they have been able to make these runs to the conference finals and even the NBA finals. And there have absolutely been times during this postseason where it's looked like he is old and sort of, especially in that pick and roll defense, when he gets switched on to smaller, quicker guards, he's been having a very hard time. Now, that is absolutely still a possibility that could come into play in this series, but we talked about this before. Luka Doncic, and maybe we'll see if Kyrie has something to say about that, even though he hasn't been quite as aggressive in the pick and roll in my eyes. But for Luka, I do think that Al has at least a little bit more of sort of a, I definitely wouldn't call it an advantage, but he can at least hold up a little bit better against Luka in some of these instances, because we see Luka, when he does have a little bit, he can sort of work through length and, skinny defenders somewhat at ease. I mean, that just goes to show how great Luka is. But, Jaden McDaniels, an all defensive caliber player, doesn't really have the body type necessarily to shut down Luka, and we saw that in the Western Conference Finals. So Al Horford, there is a chance that he could find himself getting exposed to some degree, but I do have, faith that he is going to have at least one or two big moments in this series. So 10, didn't feel great about that. It was between him and Derek Jones Jr. really for me, but I have them both behind number 9 in PJ Washington, who, with PJ, you look at sort of the transformation that he's had. I have sort of compared it some to the way that we have viewed Aaron Gordon in comparison to when he was with Orlando, when he showed some flashes. He had a little bit of, pedigree coming into the NBA, going to a high major school, and being drafted in the first round. I believe they were both lottery picks. I forget if PJ was bordering on lottery or not, but ultimately they showed a lot of promise in individual skill sets, but it was never enough to carry a middling team, which was both the situation with Aaron Gordon in Orlando and PJ Washington with Charlotte. And now that he is in this new role, he has been phenomenal for the Mavericks. Now, I know the shooting splits from the Western Conference Finals were not great, but at the same time, we saw him, despite the bad shooting numbers, hit the big shots, play some incredible defense, and I'm going to be curious to see. Like I mentioned, there may be sets where the Dallas Mavericks might go a little bit smaller if Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford are being forced out onto the perimeter defensively and are having a little bit more trouble. I wonder if we see some PJ Washington minutes at the 5. We saw it briefly in that Oklahoma City Thunder series as well in the Western Conference semifinals. So that's something that, you could keep an eye out for. But regardless of what position PJ Washington is playing, he's going to give you really high energy, good defense, and be at least a threat from the three-point line, preferably for him more so in the corner than above the break. But going to be interesting to see for the Celtics how they choose to, what their philosophy is going to be in terms of allowing him to shoot from the perimeter. Number 8, I have Derek Lively. Lively has been a phenomenal force for the Mavericks, and I know that, he has been playing less minutes than PJ Washington for a lot of this postseason run, and he doesn't necessarily provide any spacing. I was going to say the same spacing, but really any at all. But the impact that he's had on these games is tremendous. Now, a lot of people, when they've been making these types of rankings, have him even higher. I do want to maybe hold back on that a little bit. Lively should, as I mentioned, with the spacing of Porzingis, possibly with Horford as well, be tested a little bit more in a postseason series for the first time in terms of being asked to guard around the perimeter. How does that impact his game? Because he and Gafford, the platoon of them in the paint, has been tremendous for the Mavericks throughout this run. But Derek Lively, there's just a lot of unproven with him still, and he's had a phenomenal run, especially for a rookie here. But I think it's just going to be different looks, and I sort of struggle if I'm picking which players in the series I would like to, throw out there for just this particular series. Lively does fall maybe a little bit more than some other people see him as, but let me know in the comment section what your thoughts are on that. Number 7, I have Derek White. This might even, I feel like this area here, when you're talking about 8 to 5, can be, a lot of these are just very quality role players. They fit in and they give you exactly what you need. I feel like, even as I'm doing this, the Derek White at 7 is possibly a little bit low, but at the same time, Derek White, there is no bad things you can really say about his game. The one concern I have for him in this series is the Celtics don't necessarily have anybody you can pick on defensively, but I could absolutely see the Celtics with their switch-heavy defense, Luka Doncic probably trying to hunt Derek White the most, I would say, where we saw Derek, he still holds up well against bigger defenders in comparison to the majority of players in the NBA that are his size. But, in those moments, and we're talking Miles Turner right now, who's a 7-footer, but that's where we saw Drew Holiday sort of be able to come up in those instances. And Miles Turner, again, it's not to Derek White's fault at all. guarding a 7-footer as a guard in the post. We've seen Derek White be incredibly effective as a post defender this season, but I do think that there is one little bit of a sort of area in which he could maybe be exposed a little bit more. But let me know if you think that I have him too low in the comment section. Obviously, the analytics guys absolutely love Derek White, so maybe that community is going to disagree with this take. Number 6, I have Kristaps Porzingis, somebody that is incredibly hard to rank in this form because of the fact that we haven't seen him in about a month. I think it's over a month at this point. It was game 4 of the Miami Heat series that he went down during the first half, and we don't necessarily know what he is going to be able to bring in this instance, but at the same time, everything I have highlighted, he should be somebody that, as long as he's fully ready to go, does serve as a little bit of a mismatch and gives the Mavericks less options to sort of, on both sides of the ball, try and scheme their way around a very talented Celtics starting lineup. So I have Porzingis at 6 here. Number 5, I have Drew Holiday. I believe when I did my top 10 players in the conference finals, I had Kristaps Porzingis at 10 with the possibility that he could come back, and in the time that he was out, Drew Holiday was an absolute stud in the Eastern Conference Finals with the aggression on offense. Like I mentioned before, he was going at Tyrese Halliburton, converting himself to a little bit of a more primary offensive option for them, especially in that fourth quarter of Game 3 to keep them alive, along with the fact that, he had the game-sealing plays in a couple of those as well, with Game 3 getting the steal against Andrew Nembhard. Also did a tremendous job just in general against a very hot Nembhard in that matchup in Game 3, and then he also had the crucial offensive rebound in Game 4 that ultimately sealed it for the Celtics. So Drew Holiday, one of the 2 players in this finals that has a ring to his name already, and he is looking to further establish himself as a potential Hall of Famer. Number 4, I have Kyrie Irving, the man himself who has been able to transform his public reputation and has had this incredible redemption arc. Now, there are conversations that people are throwing out there about Kyrie Irving could even be better than Jason Tatum. Isaiah Thomas, former Celtic, even said that on a podcast with DeMarcus Cousins recently. I don't think I'm ready to go that far. I mean, Kyrie Irving, as much as it has been incredible for him in this postseason run, and I think, even beyond counting stats, the way that he has been a leader, the way that he has been able to be a floor general on the court, again, whether or not it goes down as an official assist or not, he has done such a good job of consistently making the right plays for Dallas all the way throughout here. But at the same time, you do look at the overall outputs for him, and he was really great in this Western Conference Finals, and he is going to be a Hall of Famer. It's tough when you're talking about multiple All-NBA caliber players all in this series. There's a lot of stars, but you would forget, based off of the way that he's talked about, that Kyrie averaged just under 16 points per game in the second round, and there were concerns a little bit in terms of him not being quite as aggressive as they need, and ultimately they're in this position, so I absolutely don't want to hold that against him. But that's why when I look at number 3, the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, Jaylen Brown, I still don't think that he necessarily gets the credit that he deserves. Now, granted, played an Indiana Pacers team last round that was a little bit of a turnstile in terms of allowing the team defense in general, and the way that anybody was able to get to the paint on them all season long. That's where Jalen did a lot of his damage. An efficient, just under 30 point per game average in the Eastern Conference Finals, along with incredible defense on the other end as well. Again, you're talking about two stars in comparison to Kyrie Irving and Jaylen Brown, but I expect a big series out of Jaylen Brown. We consistently see him getting these favorable matchups because of number 2, Jason Tatum. As much as everybody consistently puts him down, Tatum draws that extra attention, and Brown is the star that's able to convert on the opportunities that are opened up because of the fact that Tatum draws that level of attention. And Tatum, we talked about it at length yesterday. I really don't believe that there is a flaw in his game. Now, if you want to talk shot selection and some of the efficiency from the three-point line, I will definitely hear you out on that. I think that it's probably more of a mental error than anything else, but in terms of talent, I don't think that there's anything on the court that he can't do. He is the best rebounder on the Celtics. He's one of the best rebounding non-centers in the league. I want to say Julius Randle was possibly, this is off the top of my head, so definitely be sure to correct me on the spot, but I believe that he was the best rebounding non-center in the NBA this season. I'm considering Sabonis a center. That's where he played for the most part this year, if that was going to be a rebuttal from anybody. But that being said, as much as I don't think that Jason Tatum has a flaw, we're talking about the best players in the world and the ability to elevate to that next level, and that's where Luka Doncic comes into play. And I find it really hard to, put anybody over Luka in terms of, especially when it comes down to those crunch time minutes. There isn't a shot that Luka can't get to, and it feels like just about every one that he puts up is going to go in. He is not the defensive liability that he was once thought of. I've talked about throughout this postseason run. He gets a lot of love for his defense now. I do still think that there are lapses from him that don't make him, an impeccable defender, but I've talked to Celtics fans ahead of this series, and they say, oh, well, let's just try and expose Luka in an ISO situation. That's not necessarily a part of what you can do anymore. Now, if you want to ISO him to maybe try and tire him out, we know that his conditioning isn't necessarily elite. It's still not this easy solution that I think that a lot of people who aren't fully tuned into the Luka Doncic experience are aware of. But this is my top 10 list of players in the NBA Finals. Be sure to use the comments section. Give us your critiques of this list, what you agree, disagree with, and such. But we are going to be taking our next break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we have some developments with the Los Angeles Lakers and their head coaching search. It sounds like they are zeroing in on one favorite from a national media perspective, so we are going to dive into that. But first, this quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We're going NBA heavy at the start of the show, and I want to also sort of touch on the reports that came out yesterday that the Los Angeles Lakers are closing in on JJ Redick as their next head coach. Redick, of course, you have seen his name, you've seen him multiple times throughout the course of this NBA season. Recently retired NBA veteran, has been working for ESPN, made some appearances on First Take, some very contentious appearances on First Take, but also has been incredible in the broadcast crew with ESPN that he has done throughout the postseason. I would imagine, I actually don't 100% know what the broadcast team for the finals is going to be, but considering that it is on ABC, I would imagine he's probably a part of it. And it's just clear when you listen to him talk, he is incredibly smart in terms of basketball knowledge. And you know, as somebody who has never obviously played in the NBA, it is really educating. The podcast that he hosts as well, Mind the Game, I believe it's called. Apologies if I have that wrong. But him and LeBron James, and obviously, you know, you get LeBron James talking about basketball in a more analytical sense. I don't think that we've seen, you know, LeBron necessarily open up quite as much from a basketball IQ standpoint with anybody more than he has with JJ Redick, and it is just really educating. And now there are sort of, you know, ideas that this was the unofficial interview process of JJ Redick becoming the next head coach of the LA Lakers. Now, I don't know, I think that it's interesting. I would be curious to see what sort of the order of events in terms of when JJ Redick decided that he wanted to start coaching was, because, you know, he's never been on a coaching staff, period, and there's a chance that the Lakers could hire him to a head coach immediately. That is a massive jump, as much as JJ Redick absolutely understands the X's and O's of basketball. To make the jump from, you know, and we've seen various coaches sort of come in and out of broadcasting into the world of coaching, but typically there's at least some sort of coaching background. JJ Redick has never coached above the youth level, and now he's going to be, you know, on one of the most historic franchises in the league with one of the biggest stars. We've seen the level of scrutiny that LeBron James's head coaches have faced in recent years now, to the idea that LeBron was sort of vetting JJ Redick and sort of, you know, sniffing him out in terms of whether or not he was had what it takes to be the head coach. I don't know if that was it necessarily. LeBron James, he did make it clear at the beginning of the offseason that the Lakers should look to prioritize Anthony Davis's preferences over LeBron's. So I don't think that this is necessarily LeBron, you know, being the puppeteer and running the show and everything. But that being said, you know, JJ Redick has been very popular since he has joined the media, and it does feel like a little bit of a splash hire. If I'm JJ Redick, I'm not going to say no to turning down the Lakers head coaching job if I'm trying to break into coaching and there's this golden opportunity staring me in the face. But at the same time, you know, that is a massive, you know, workload and amount of pressure to take on as you are going into, you know, your first season as a head coach. And this is a roster with the Lakers that are trying to compete for a championship. And ultimately, I've talked about this before, I don't think that they are going to be a finals contender next season. So is front office, is the media going to understand that for the Lakers next season, I don't know if they can find their way into being a top 4 seed even? I would sort of consider that a successful season. Listen, you're the Lakers, you have LeBron James, you have Anthony Davis. I understand that you want more than that, but I don't see the Lakers on the same level of some of these other teams in the Western Conference. I find it very hard to believe that the Nuggets, who didn't even make the conference finals, that, you know, the Nuggets have obviously dominated that matchup the past couple years. I don't believe that there's anything the Lakers can do to take advantage of a situation like that. You see the way that the Timberwolves have come on, that the Dallas Mavericks, who are now in the NBA Finals, And the Western Conference is just so deep and so tough that, for the Lakers, I would just like to see them not have to go through the play-in tournament, even though from a, win-or-go-home type situation, it's incredibly fascinating to watch the Lakers in those types of games. But at the same time, again, I think that it is just going to be a lot of pressure for JJ Redick in that type of a situation. Now, the report came out just about 24 hours ago. A variety of different networks picked up on it. Yahoo, New York Times, I believe The Athletic did as well, that they are, quote, zeroing in, CBS Sports as well. But it has not become official just yet. James Borrego reportedly also really impressed the Lakers during their at-length meeting with the organization as well. Borrego was, I believe, an assistant at the time that he was in New Orleans at the same time as Anthony Davis. But Borrego is somebody who has more experience, obviously, and if you are the Lakers that are trying to sort of, to some degree, push your chips in for this season, maybe that makes more sense as a hire. But again, ultimately, I think it depends on how the Lakers view their own perspective. If they think that they are NBA Finals contenders and that it is to along the lines of, championship or bust, I think that's a huge thing to ask JJ Redick. Now, he might have a lot of long-term upside, and he might even be great from the jump. But just in terms of, how is the organization going to react if the Lakers don't, come out of the first round this next year or are at the bottom of the standings in the playoff picture, at least, as a 7 or 8 seed yet again? How much is JJ Redick going to get blamed? And ultimately, again, that's a whole different discussion for the Lakers front office themselves. They haven't necessarily given us all too much, but it seems like they are probably expecting themselves to be, championship competitive. And we'll get more answers on that as the offseason approaches in terms of, are they going to move on from their first round picks that they held on to at the trade deadline to go out and acquire more talent? Is their thought process trying to add a third star along with Anthony Davis and LeBron James? Or do they try and bring in some supplementary talent? If you look at the series they played against the Nuggets, Anthony Davis was incredible. I mean, ultimately, I think Jokic outplayed Anthony Davis, but it can at least be a debate because Anthony Davis, really up until, I believe it was game 3 or game 4 that he had that shoulder injury that took him out from there. But Anthony Davis was incredibly impressive. He was a force on the offensive end, and we saw Jokic sort of wait around until AD would go to the bench in the third quarter to really start attacking himself, which I do think has something to do with the fact of what Jokic views Anthony Davis as a defender. And Jokic ended up with big stats in every single one of these games. But again, I think that a lot of the times it was when Rui Hachimura was guarding him that he sort of flipped the switch and said, okay, now is the time to attack. The Lakers need a backup big to some degree. Hachimura, I would probably be surprised if he's on the roster next year. They signed him to a contract last offseason, and he's had some moments, but at the same time, especially if you're not going to be able to shoot well from 3, not really doing much at all, especially when the Nuggets are the team to beat, at least for the Lakers. It seemed like that was the case in the Western Conference in general. Didn't necessarily play out that way in the postseason, but that is the team that they definitely are going to be at least keeping in the back of their minds as they put together their roster for next season, and Rui is definitely not the answer there in terms of being the Jokic stopper. I don't know what the backup big is to potentially try and, shut down Jokic. Shutting down Jokic is obviously a very tall task, but if they can find some sort of way, I know that Nick Claxton is probably out of their pay range, but I don't know, even if you can get like a Jonas Valanciunas to take a little bit of a discounted deal Obviously, I know there are going to be some problems on the offensive end. I don't have the perfect answer as of June 5th. We haven't even necessarily, we're not at free agency just yet. But if you can sort of replicate what the Timberwolves did, possibly to some degree, where there is a possibility to run some sort of a double big lineup, or at least having somebody, a 4 that has some size that can take on the Jokic matchup one-on-one. Karl Anthony Towns is not a perfect defender, but he did a good enough job holding up one-on-one, and that allowed Rudy Gobert to be a roamer, and that's why he was so impactful down the stretch of that series. And I wonder if the Lakers could try and replicate something similar to that. Now, obviously, for them, regardless, it starts with finding the head coach. But let me know what you think in the comments section as to who the Lakers should be targeting, whether or not JJ Redick would make sense for them this season, or if they should go with somebody who has a little bit more experience. But we're going to be taking our next break here. I want to dive into another little bit of an off-season, I wouldn't say rebuild. I mean, for this team, it is a little bit more of a rebuild. The San Antonio Spurs, they came out and said everybody other than Victor Wembanyama and Devin Vassell is available this offseason. So just want to sort of look at where the Spurs currently stand as the pressure is going to continue to ramp up against them as in the years to come, as Wembanyama becomes one of the best players in the NBA. So we are going to be taking a quick break, and then when we come back on the other side, we will be diving into that. Stick with us. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Moving on, we are going to be talking about the San Antonio Spurs, who put out a report yesterday that the team considers everyone other than Victor Wembanyama and Devin Vassell as touchable, as a piece that they would be willing to move off of. As last year, we saw the flashes of Victor Wembanyama and how much of a bright future he has in the NBA for years to come, and yet they were still one of the worst teams in the NBA at 22-60. There were only a few teams worse than them this year, and again, some things to build off of. I especially thought that the on-ball creation of Devin Vassell was something that maybe didn't know if that was going to ever fully form with him. Going back to his time at Florida State, he was viewed a little bit more of a catch-and-shoot role guy, and he showed that he has on-ball skills and that he can be a little bit more of a combo guard. But that being said, the Spurs need to go out and find a legitimate point guard to help keep that offense together. They were running way too many minutes of Jeremy Sohan at the point guard, who Sohan is somebody who I never really liked coming into the NBA, and then as opposed to some of, other people in the media, their perceptions on him. And then this year, he started getting a ton of run at point guard, and everybody absolutely hated him. So I feel like I'm probably somewhere in the middle. He's not my favorite player. He's not somebody I would look to highlight on my offense. Maybe he does have some sort of value and can be a piece of this Spurs team moving forward, but the idea of playing him at point guard, and the Spurs quickly realized that was a massive mistake. So I'm not sure exactly what the option is for them. I'm sure they're going to be looking in the draft in terms of trying to find somebody who can fit alongside the two guys they already have. We know the reputation surrounding the 2024 draft, that there isn't any high-end star talent, but there could be, some potential glue guys and key role players. The Spurs obviously need a little bit more than that. Now, a name that I thought was potentially interesting for them in terms of someone who could run some point guard minutes for them, Nikola Topic, it was just announced earlier today that he has a torn ACL. He was doing a combine in Italy, and he is probably going to miss the majority of, if not the entire 2024-25 season. So that is probably a little bit off the table. Now, if the Spurs loved him, they could still take him, but that's not an immediate answer, and I feel like that's probably something they want to jump on. I would imagine that's their number one priority this offseason, is trying to get a legitimate point guard option. Now, Reed Sheppard is somebody that I have been a very big fan of. Now, there are some concerns in terms of, can he be a full-time starting point guard? You have Devin Vassell, who does have this past year's experience of doing a little bit more ball handling himself. I think that between Reed Sheppard and Devin Vassell, again, maybe that's not the high-end, point guard that you want to pair Victor Wembanyama with long term, but I do think that there's real upside with Reed Sheppard, and I would be curious to see. I think that Sheppard and Vassell can play off of one another very well if they were put into a system. Again, Reed Sheppard is somebody that I feel like has some sneaky upside as a number one ball handler, but can also fit in just about any system because of the fact that he hasn't been ball dominant through his young career, specifically his freshman season at Kentucky, and the way that he can sort of mold himself into a variety of different spots, something that I would definitely be interested in. But outside of that, I will say I'm a pretty big fan of Keldon Johnson for the Spurs. He is the forward that they drafted in the first round a few years ago, and I do really like his two-way ability. So I think it did take me a little bit sort of to come around to the idea of Devin Vassell being a more untouchable player in comparison to Keldon Johnson. Now, eventually I did come around, but Johnson is somebody that if I'm the Spurs, I would probably like to retain. He averaged 22 points per game last season before taking on a smaller role. He averaged 22 points per game in 22-23, I should say. Last season took on a reduced role, and we saw the overall numbers drop a little bit, but his three-point efficiency is something that we have seen, be an effective part of his game in the past. He shot 40% from three on 5 attempts per game in the 2021-22 season. Last year had a little bit of a rebound in comparison to 22-23, but again, I feel like I'm just saying a lot of numbers right now. Point being, I think that he is a 3-and-D player who could fit in well with what the Spurs are trying to build, especially considering the fact that their defense was horrendous last year. Obviously, the numbers with Victor Wembanyama on the court made them a lot better, but at the same time, the point of attack defenders is definitely a concern with the Spurs. So Keldon Johnson is somebody who I think can sort of play into their situation in the long term. And, it's going to be interesting to see how the Spurs, like I mentioned, as much as I like Reed Sheppard, and maybe there are some other players out there as well. Stephon Castle, he believes that he is a point guard. A lot of NBA GMs consider him as more of a wing. That's sort of what he played into when he was at Kentucky or at Connecticut last season. But his high school background is being a point guard, and maybe there is something there. But as much as, you can go through the different options, there really isn't a can't-miss prospect in this draft. They have the number 4 and number 8 picks, where they can maybe try and go with one more upside prospect and one a little bit safer. But there's also a very real possibility that, again, as much as there isn't a can't miss, getting 2 picks in the top 8 could be tempting for some of these teams that are a little bit in the middle ground. Now, the Spurs have gone out and said that they are not interested in bringing Trae Young to San Antonio. Probably a player, as much as he's a good talent, they don't want to disrupt the development of Victor Wembanyama. Trae is somebody who needs the ball in his hands a lot. That's still something that, and doesn't really play off ball very much at all. Wemby is somebody who can create on the ball for himself as well, and I'm sure that's not something they want to take away from. As much as they want to be a better team next season, it is not that they are in total desperation mode to, make the playoffs. It's about trying to put Victor Wembanyama in the best possible position to succeed. And there are a lot of steps that are sort of in the way of that. But let me know what your hopes, expectations are for the Spurs in this upcoming offseason. But we are going to be taking our final break of the show here. When we come back on the other side, we've been talking some hypotheticals, but we do have something solidified of Christian McCaffrey signing a contract extension with the San Francisco 49ers. So we are going to be breaking down the details of that deal and what it means for the team as a whole. We will be right back after this quick break. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day. Yesterday, the news broke that the San Francisco 49ers are signing Christian McCaffrey to a 2-year contract extension. 2 years, $38 million, which is a little bit unheard of for running backs in the year 2024, but something that is very much deserved considering the amount of production that Christian McCaffrey has been able to bring really through the entirety of his career. But since he's come to San Francisco, he has been just an incredibly impactful player. And last year, he took it to new levels, winning the Offensive Player of the Year award. He led the league in scrimmage yards with 2,023, 1,459 on the ground, 564 in the pass game, 21 total touchdowns. He has been an absolute menace for the most part. And I think that as much as seeing that amount of money, $19 million per year for a running back, is definitely somewhat risky, I feel like the fact that it is going to be a short-term deal, he's going to be headed into his age 28 season, I believe, and that is something to definitely consider. He's got a lot of tread. He led the league in touches last year as well. So that's something that you do have to have a little bit of concern, especially considering his injury history, in terms of, is there a chance that this contract ends up looking bad? But again, the 49ers are really all in on the Super Bowl this year. They're keeping their stars happy. I believe that the way that this deal works actually does sort of reduce their salary cap number for the upcoming season. But this isn't a long-term deal. That's one that the 49ers are going to be stuck with. Christian McCaffrey is an incredible player, and you know what? He's making $19 million, but when you look at sort of the remainder of the options on the table, especially at running back, Christian McCaffrey just fits into what the 49ers do so well in terms of the flexibility of where he can line up, obviously having, other options such as Deebo Samuel, who can line up in the backfield. That just gives Kyle Shanahan all of these different options to sort of shuffle his hand and confuse the defense on the other end. So listen, again, it's very expensive. It's $4 million per year more than the second largest, annual average value of a running back contract in the NFL. Alvin Kamara is number 2 in that category. He makes $15 million per year, and you would unquestionably take Christian McCaffrey at that 19 over Kamara at 15. So there is really no complaints in my eyes when you talk about Christian McCaffrey receiving this type of a deal. Jeff Darlington of ESPN did say that he doesn't believe it's going to affect the contract negotiation of Brandon Ayuk, which is a part of this conversation because it's not just Ayuk, but it is Deebo Samuel as well, both of them coming into the final guaranteed years of their contract. They obviously draft Ricky Pearsall in the first round of the draft this year. It seems like that trio isn't going to be here for years to come, but at the same time, they go out and further establish the core that they currently have. Their eyes are on the Super Bowl for this season. Deebo Samuel put out a quote, I believe it was today or yesterday, that he is ready to sort of move on from all of the nonsense on the offseason and just get back to playing football, which is a great sign. The 49ers should be the favorite in the NFC this year. I really don't believe that there are any teams that have the same level of roster talent. Now, I do think it's probably going to be closer than it was last year, where the Detroit Lions, I liked a lot of what they did in the offseason, especially boosting up on the secondary through the draft, where there's some unknowns, absolutely, but going out, getting Terrion Arnold and Ines Rakestraw, both viable options for them. The secondary was their number one, biggest concern last season. Hopefully you see some of the other defensive players that they drafted last year that held big roles develop a little bit more. Jack Campbell had his moments at linebacker, one of the most heavily scrutinized first-round picks at the time, at least during the 2023 draft, having Brian Branch in the secondary. Melifonwu as well, who wasn't a draft pick last year, but in the past couple seasons, the way that he sort of emerged with the role as sort of a hard-hitting, run-stopping, potentially sending in blitz situations from the secondary as well. Should be interesting to see with them. You do also have the Eagles, who went out and spent some in free agency, adding Saquon Barkley, of course, on offense, where as much as, again, a situation where paying running backs can be a little bit of a risky move, they definitely needed an upgrade over DeAndre Swift, in my eyes. Offensive line took a hit with the retirement of Jason Kelce, but also addressed their secondary as well. Potentially got 2 of, if not the 2 best corners in the draft with Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. So those, I would say, as of right now, are the top 3 teams in my eyes. Also, when you talk about the Eagles, as much as it's a roster conversation, the fact that they made changes with the coordinators as well to go out and get Kellen Moore on the offensive side of the ball, get Vic Fangio on the defensive side of the ball. I definitely have more faith in the Eagles for the upcoming season, but even still, the 49ers are pretty easily the best team in my eyes in the NFC for next season. So we will just sort of have to wait and see. I feel like the excitement level right now, as much as we're about to get into the NBA Finals, and of course I'm stoked for that, but NFL really can't come soon enough. So we are going to be starting soon enough on the show here, we're going to be starting some predictions for each NFL team in the coming weeks. So definitely keep an eye out for that. Let me know which teams you guys have the most thoughts on. But also give me your thoughts on this Christian McCaffrey deal as well, where Brock Purdy is going to be coming up on a contract extension after this season. So I believe the way that this works is Purdy is going to be playing out his last year on his rookie deal, while Christian McCaffrey, again, I'm not 100% sure, looking at the details as they still sort of come out surrounding McCaffrey. They might overlap 1 year in terms of McCaffrey making his $19 million and Brock Purdy being on whatever contract extension that he ends up getting. But, paydays are coming for the 49ers, absolutely, and this is their chance to strike and take advantage. So let me know if you are in agreement with me that the 49ers are the team to beat in the NFC. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. We are live every 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. So we will be back tomorrow afternoon, and we will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.